Hey everybody, this is Alex Merced from alexmercedcoder.dev, and here I am in our Vite environment where we're creating for doing future lessons here in React. So first, just kind of get set up. The way I'm going to be doing this is that for each particular lesson, I'm going to create a set of components. Okay, so what I'm going to do is this lesson is going to be on iteration, so basically looping over arrays of data in React and JSX. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a folder here in my source folder, new folder. I'm going to call this components, because that's generally how you always want to kind of create a folder where you organize all your components. And I'm going to take each lesson and give it its own folder. So this will be the arrays lesson. And I'll put the components I'll use there first. I'm going to delete everything here in this app components. I'm going to go take this app component and I am going to just remove it all. Boop. Okay, and there we go. Okay, so we're going to want is to put something in there and so forth. Okay, I'm going to want to get rid of these since I'm not using these anymore. And I'm going to want to get rid of that because I'm not using that now. Okay, and get rid of that because I'm not using that. Okay. Now, the reason why I'm getting so many like sort of red squiggly lines is mainly because of the ESLint settings. ESLint is like a spell checker for JavaScript, and since it's telling you like, or a grammar checker. So it's telling you when you can set rules for kind of how you want your JavaScript to be written, and it'll give you errors when you violate those rules. So in this case, a lot of those were just unused variable warnings. Again, you can tweak that in here if you wanted to kind of customize it. I'm leaving it the way it was set up by the template, but just so you can understand sort of where a lot of that's coming from. Okay, so I'm going to go back and we're going to make a file called new file, and we'll call it array lesson .jsx. So JSX is a name for a file that's going to have JSX in it. Okay, I'm pretty sure that at least it used to be that in the Vite template you needed it to be explicitly JSX. In create React app, that is not required. It could be JS or JSX, and that it would work. Okay, but I'm going to stick to the JSX naming convention because this is going to be a React component. Okay, see, it gives me that little React logo. Okay, so generally in these components, what you want to do is you just have to export a function, because now we're working with ES module syntax. So that means everything can have its own file, but for me to use it in other files, I have to, one, send it out of this file, so I have to export it. And two, I have to then import it wherever I use it. So in this case, let's just first create the component. So I'm going to say function array lesson props, and it's just going to return h1 array lesson for now. Okay, and then once I'm done creating the component, I have to export it. So default export, actually it's export default, and then you say array lesson. Okay, so that just means I'm making this particular component available for use. Okay, so again, so he doesn't like it whenever I don't use a variable, so I'll just take props out for now. Okay, just so that way it doesn't drive me nuts. Okay, cool. So again, I'm exporting the component. So I wrote a function. So basically every file should generally have like one thing in it. That's going to be the way you kind of want to do things here. And now I'm going to go back to my app.jsx where my app component's defined, and I'm going to import that component. So I can click import. VS Code will make this a lot easier because if I start typing it, it should know that it's there and let me like import it pretty easily. So if I start typing in like array, see right there, array lesson, I can click on it and see it just writes the import statement for me. Nice. And now I can use it and just say array lesson. Okay, and there it is, array lesson. Okay, although those are some big letters. Okay. I may want to get rid of that CSS too, but we'll see. We'll cross that bridge. I'll just pop out the CSS. Okay. And as you can see, if I want to use CSS, all I have to do is just import the CSS file. Okay, so you can actually use multiple CSS files. What a lot of people do sometimes is create a CSS file per component. I'm going to get rid of that one. And then there's another one that's kind of linked in the main.jsx here. So you see that one right there. I'm going to just delete all the styling in there. Just get rid of it. Clean house. Okay, cool, perfect. Okay, so now the array lesson component is now rendering on here. Another cool thing you have when you're in an environment like this, you should be able to use React DevTools. So if you look up the Google extension React DevTools, there's a Google extension you can download, React Developer Tools, And now when you're looking at a React website, if I open up my DevTools, just to show you, okay. Oh, my computer's freezing. Okay, there we go. Okay. You'll see I have this particular components tab now. If I click on that, see, I can actually see my component tree. Okay, I can see that there's app, and then below is the array lesson component. And I can click on it, and I can take a look at its props. I can take a look at its state. Okay, so this is going to be really useful for understanding what's going on in your components. So this should become, you shouldn't really need the console log stuff anymore. You should be looking in here to see, hey, what is the state of my component at the moment? Okay, this should become your new best friend when you're working with React. Okay, but with that, what I want to do in this lesson is show you how to work with arrays in React. Now, first off, just to show you that, hey, usually we have to return JSX, right? But a component could also return an array of JSX. So I could actually go here, throw an array. Okay, and I can say, hey, h1 hello world, h2 goodbye world. Okay, and you see that. Now notice how it's giving me this error here. It says missing key prop. Anytime there's an array of JSX elements, so there's 1, 2, different JSX elements in an array, React wants you to give the top level element a key prop. So we'll just say like key 1, key 2. This is important for doesn't change the way React works. Like in the sense that like you could not use that key prop and everything's going to show up just fine. What's happening under the hood is if that array is updated, it generally uses the key to determine whether that particular element in the array had changed from a previous render. So in the case, if it sees that, hey, this particular, on the next render, it sees that, hey, there's a value that is different, it can help it determine sort of how to compare different elements in the array. Because again, the thing with key 1 might be the first thing in the array the first time we render, but it might be the third thing in the array in the second render, but they're the same thing. But since they have the same key, it can figure out how to compare them to more surgically manipulate the DOM or update the DOM. So it just allows it to update more efficiently. So you don't have to do it, but if you don't put in the key prop, it is going to be less efficient when it updates the DOM during state changes. So that's the reason why. But as you can see here, an array of JSX renders just fine, okay? But this is kind of ugly, right? You're like, okay, well, I don't like writing it like that. So what they did is they did build in a syntax that essentially allows you to do this without having to write an array. It's called a fragment. So if I were to take out this comma and take out these arrays, instead what I do is I put in an empty set of brackets like this, and then wrap the other side of these brackets over here. That works. Essentially what's happening here is that when it gets translated by Babel, it's going to just treat this as one element in the array, and this is a second element in the array. Okay, so this thing called a fragment is just basically allows you to create like arrays of JSX without writing it as an array. Okay, and see, that's kind of nice. Usually you would use this when you have multiple top level elements. Okay, because remember, one of the rules of JSX is you can only have one top level element. Okay, so essentially what you're doing here is we're just splitting this up into two different JSX expressions in an array. It's just being done under the hood. Okay, so that's the first lesson number 1. So 1, React knows how to render an array of JSX. 2, you don't have to write an array of JSX. You could just use this fragment syntax to express the same thing in a much more intuitive way, because now you're just writing HTML. You're not thinking about the array. Okay, cool. So now we've established those two things. What happens when you have an array of data? Okay, so let's actually go generate an array. A really cool way to generate some dummy data is to use AI. So I'm going to go to bard.google.com. Okay, I'm going to ask it to generate a JavaScript array of 2023 movies. Okay. Cool. Let's wait for it to just generate all the movies. Wonderful. Okay, supposedly those are pictures, so that's cool. Okay, cool. So there's my array. So I'm going to just put this inside of the component for now. So we'll say const data equals this array. Okay. You know what? That is probably taking too much. Oh, I see what it did. Let me just get rid of this. Okay, that's probably taking up a little too much space in this file. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to move this to another file. So I'm going to create a new file called data.js. And I'm going to paste this in there. And then I'm going to export that movies 2023. So default export movies 2023. Or is it export default? I always get that backwards. Export default movies 2023. Perfect. Okay. So that way the array's in this file, but I'm sending it out, which allows me to now import it into this file. So I can clear this out. Okay, so that looks a lot cleaner. And that's the beauty of the setup. I can now break things up into multiple files, which allows no file to get so cluttered that I can't read it anymore. So now what I can do is I can just go import movies 2023. There we go. Cool. So now what I want to do is generate these movies. Okay, one way I could do it, again, all I need is an array of JSX. So we can just say, hey, here's my const array of JSX. There it is, and it's going to equal an empty array. I just have to figure out how to populate that array. I could use a traditional loop, so I could just do something like for let I equal 0. If I is greater than long as I is less than movies.23.length, so length of the array, and then on each loop we'll just add 1. This is all fine and good. And then on each loop, what I could just do is something like array of JSX dot push. And then what I can do is I can push a JSX expression in there. And I can say, hey, I want a div. Okay. But I need a variable with that thing. So I'm going to say, hey, we're going to make a variable called movie, which equals movies 2023, and give me the movie at that particular index. Okay. Again, this isn't going to be the ideal way of doing it. The point is I'm showing you that you can do it. Okay. And now I can sit here and do something like h1 movie dot title, and then I can do an image source equals movie dot image URL. Okay, alt equals movie dot title. Again, the alt is what like a screen reader would show if they can't, if someone's using a reader to read the page. Okay, and that would work. So again, I'm looping through each item in the array. I'm taking that movie in that round and assigning it to its own variable, and then pushing a JSX into the array. Okay, and now what I can do is replace this with that array. So I can just go over here. I'm just going to actually replace all this and say, hey, I want to replace this with array of JSX. Okay, and see now it's rendering all the different movies. Okay, because again, we created an array and then we pushed one JSX expression per movie in there. So you could just use a traditional loop, but you can see like this is kind of like messy and kind of ugly. So typically the way it would be done is that you would go over here, and what you would do is maybe return like a div. Let's say we wanted to put this in a div. And then inside the div, we would use curly brackets and just do the map. We would use a map function because we just want an array anyways. So map allows you to take one array with one thing and turn it into an array of another thing. So we can take the array of movie objects and turn it into an array of JSX. So we would just say, hey, take movies 2023 dot map. Okay, and then we just say, okay, for each movie, and we might as well pull the index while we're at it. Okay, and then this needs to be a callback inside of map, so I need another set of parentheses in here. Okay, so for each movie index, what I want to do is return. And then what I can do is I can just copy this. Okay, and actually I don't really need this anymore. So I'm going to comment this all out. I'll leave it there so that way you can refer to it. If you look at my code, return. Okay. And again, it's complaining about the key prop because the map returns an array. And then again, it wants every item in the array to have that key prop. So the easiest thing for now would be to use the index as the prop. Okay, and there we go. Now it's happy. Okay, so basically what I'm doing is I'm saying, hey, take the array movies 2023 and then loop over that array. The item in the array is the movie, and then we'll also give you the index of that movie in the array. So in this case, it's like this would be 0 on the first loop, and then this would be Barbie on the first loop. And then what I'm returning, whatever I return goes in the new array. So I'm returning this JSX, so that becomes an item in the new array. So when this function finishes, what I end up with is an array of JSX. Okay, and then since that's being rendered here, it just renders that JSX. Because again, what we established earlier is that React knows how to render an array of JSX. It knows how. So you see this takes up a lot less space, makes it all a lot less cluttered. Now, how could I improve upon this? Again, going back to like the idea of separating concerns. Okay, now that we've looped over the array, usually when you get to this, you don't want to just put all your UI logic right there in the map. This is kind of like a little ugly. Okay, so oftentimes what I may want to do is make another component. Okay, so I will call this a new file. I'll make a new component. We'll call it array item.js. Okay, and I'll create the function array item. Okay, return h1 array item for now. And then we are going to export default array item. Okay, so there's my component. I'm going to go bring it into here. And actually, this should be PyJSX. Just make sure that I don't run into any issues later. Okay, and then I can import array item. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to cut this out and replace this with array item. Okay, see, now I'm getting back an array item for each thing. Again, right now it's not using a key prop, so that's why it's complaining. But otherwise, we'll clear that out. Now, the array item should have, I do want to use that movie and index in there, so maybe I'll pass that in as a prop. So I'll say, hey, for each array item you put in, pass in movie as a prop. So movie. Okay, and then we'll pass in the index as index. Okay. Cool. Okay, and now I'll go back over here. And now the array item, I can now put in that UI logic in here instead. So return div key, and then I'll just destructure movie and index from props. Okay, and it should work. Movie, that title is missing in props validation. Wow. Wow, you gotta let that one go. Okay, so basically what it's saying is that like, hey, this is, it wants me to, it's asking for TypeScript, even though we're not using TypeScript. It wants me to like define what movie is supposed to look like. Okay, so maybe if I do this, I will just say props and say const movie index. See if it complains a little bit less if I do it this way. Props. Still not like it? Yeah, still doesn't like it. Okay, that's fine. I might want to turn off ESLint then in that case, but I will deal with that later. Okay. So in this case, again, I'm out of props. I'm pulling out movie and index, and then we put it on movie in there. And so it works. But you see now when I take a look at the original array component, okay, this is a lot easier to read. So all I'm doing is saying, hey, for each movie, give me one of these components. Okay, and then this component just handles how does one movie display, making it a lot sort of simpler to look at. Okay, but let's explore how to kind of manipulate that ESLint. Ignore patterns. React refresh only exports. Allow constant exports. Root true. extends. Okay. Something I can change in the config. React. Okay. I'll do a quick search just so we can get all that markup away. Okay, and basically to turn that off, all you have to do is add this rule. So here in your ESLint here, you'll see the section called rules, and here's where you can customize the rules of ESLint. And for this specific thing to turn off that prop types error, so that way it just doesn't make everything red, you just turn that off just like that. Okay, now I'm still getting one little thing, but that's something I can fix. It's asking me for a key prop, so I'll just give it one. We'll just say key equals index. So that way it stops complaining there. Okay, and cool. Okay, so again, when we take a look at this, much simpler. So we see we're just mapping and saying, hey, for each movie, give me an array item. And then the array item talks about how to handle that movie. So again, separating your components out and saying, okay, hey, having a component that does the looping, but then not have all your display logic in there is a little bit easier to think through. Say, okay, hey, this is how one movie should look like, have a component for that, and then just have the map pass the data to that component will make it much easier to kind of think through the logic of this instead of trying to do it all in one file. Okay, but this essentially hopefully helps you understand like looping over things in React and why people, because people will always like teach you about map and they don't really fully sometimes capture like the reason why you're using map and why map works for this particular application, why not just a normal for loop. Hopefully you can see that you can use a for loop, but it's a little bit more verbose. With map, we can kind of get cut straight to the chase and just get our array of JSX. So you can find all that here in this section of the repo. So it'll be in the repo where I have all this code. I'll see ya all later on. And hopefully you guys enjoyed this. I'll see you soon.